The Midnight Summons. It happened just before midnight in Rome. 12 cardinals walked into a sealed room, the doors locked behind them, and what the Pope said next, none of them ever expected to hear in their lives. The phone calls began at 10:47 p.m. One by one, each cardinal received the same message, the same tone, the same 8 words. His Holiness wants to see you tonight. No agenda, no subject, no room to refuse. By 11:30, 12 men in black cassocks had crossed the threshold of the Apostolic Palace. None of them spoke to the others. Each carried the same look, confusion mixed with something colder, something like fear. Behind those walls, Pope Leo XIV was waiting, and he was not in a forgiving mood. The reason for the summons traced back 10 days earlier, April 23, 2026, the day the Pope had returned from his apostolic journey to Africa. 11 days, 4 countries: Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, Equatorial Guinea. He had walked through dust-covered chapels. He had stood inside a prison in Bata, listening to inmates pray the Our Father in pouring rain. He had met children in Cameroon who had walked 4 hours to see him. He had returned exhausted. He had also returned changed. But it was on the plane back to Rome that everything shifted. A red folder had been placed quietly on his private desk during the final leg of the flight. No name, no sender, only a thin label on the front. Confidential. Internal use. He opened it somewhere over the Mediterranean. By the time the wheels touched the ground in Rome, his mood had hardened into something none of his aides had ever seen before. The folder contained 23 pages, 12 names, the same 12 cardinals who would later receive the call before midnight. What had happened during those 11 days in Africa was not just disobedience. It was something colder, something more coordinated. While Leo XIV had been preaching to crowds in Yaoundé and Luanda, a small circle inside the Roman Curia had quietly tried to slow down, and in some cases reverse, 3 of his most important reforms. The first reform was financial transparency. Leo XIV had pushed for full audits of every Vatican department by the end of the year. Documents would be reviewed by lay financial experts hired from outside Rome, people with no friendships, no debts, no protection inside the walls. The second reform was structural. He wanted to reduce the influence of certain curia offices and redistribute decision-making to bishops in countries far from Europe. He had said it openly during the African trip. Rome cannot govern a church that has long since stopped being only Roman. The third reform was the most dangerous. A new accountability protocol for bishops accused of covering up abuse. No more transfers, no more silent retirements, public processes, public records, names attached to outcomes. While he was in Africa, all 3 reforms had been quietly softened. A signature here, a new clause there, a delay buried inside a bureaucratic memo that no one was supposed to read carefully. By the time Leo XIV finished the folder over the Mediterranean, it was clear he had been outmaneuvered, quietly, patiently, professionally. But Leo XIV had spent decades watching the Curia from the inside. He knew how it moved. He knew how it stalled. He knew how it absorbed popes who pushed too hard and exhausted popes who pushed too slowly. He had been pushed. He just had not yet decided how he would push back. For the next 7 days, he said nothing. To his closest aides, this was unusual. Leo XIV was direct. When something disturbed him, he addressed it. He did not wait, but this time he waited. He attended his general audiences. He smiled at pilgrims in St. Peter's Square. On April the 27th, he received the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Apostolic Palace. He prayed with her in the Urban 66 Chapel. He spoke about peace, unity, and the unarmed peace of the risen Christ. The cameras captured nothing strange. The world saw a pope at ease. Inside, the storm was already building. Behind closed doors, he began calling people in, one at a time. Quiet meetings, no witnesses. First, the head of the Office of Statistics. then a layman who had worked alongside him during his years in Peru, someone he trusted with his life. Then the auditors he had personally appointed the previous summer. Then, finally, the prefect of the dicastery for communication. They came alone. They left alone. None of them spoke about what was discussed. By the morning of April 30th, the contents of the red folder had been fully verified. Every page, every signature, every date, every email, every authorization. Nothing left to interpretation. There was one meeting in particular that hardened him. A retired official, decades inside the Curia, was summoned at dawn. The man had walked into the Pope's private study expecting a conversation about pastoral matters. Instead, Leo XIV placed 3 pages in front of him and asked one question. "Have you seen this pattern before?" The man read in silence. When he looked up, his eyes had filled. "Yes, Holy Father. Many times. Under 3 popes. Always the same playbook. They wait until the Pope is tired, or away, or distracted. Then they move." How did the others handle it? The retired official looked at the floor. They did not. That is why they were tired. Leo XIV nodded once. He thanked the man and said nothing else. But after the door closed, he sat at his desk for a long time without moving. That afternoon, he walked through the Vatican gardens alone for almost an hour. A close aide later said it was the only time he had ever seen the Pope visibly angry. That night, the calls went out. The first cardinal arrived at 11:14 p.m. He came from his apartment near the Vatican walls, elderly, slow-moving, carrying a small leather binder under his arm, though no one had told him to bring documents. Maybe instinct, maybe habit, maybe fear. The second arrived 3 minutes later. He stepped out of a black sedan and walked straight in without speaking to the driver. The third and fourth arrived together, both from the same residence, both from the same dicastery. They exchanged nervous glances in the elevator. Neither said a word. By 11:35, all 12 had arrived. They were not led into the Pope's private library. They were led into a smaller room, a side hall in the Apostolic Palace rarely used after dark. The lights had been deliberately dimmed. A single long table, 12 chairs along one side, and at the far end, 1 chair empty. The Pope had not yet entered. The cardinals stood. None of them sat. None of them dared. For 3 minutes, no one spoke. The silence became unbearable. Some shifted on their feet. One adjusted his pectoral cross. Another wiped sweat from his temple, though the room was cold. Then the door opened. Leo XIV walked in alone. No assistant, no translator, no camera, no note-taker. He carried only a single red folder and a small black leather notebook. He placed both on the table at his end of the room. Then he spoke. "Sit," he said. They sat. He did not. He looked at each of them, one by one, slowly, deliberately. 12 faces, 12 men, 12 names he had memorized over the past week. He held the eyes of each man for several seconds longer than was comfortable. When he reached the last cardinal, he opened the folder. He pulled out a single page. He held it up. "Do any of you," he said, "want to tell me what this is?" No one answered. The page was a memo. Internal, dated April 16th. A single paragraph authorizing the delay of one of his reforms, the lay-led financial audit, pushed back by 90 days. Below the paragraph, 4 signatures. All 4 men were sitting in that room. He turned the paper so they could see it more clearly. "3 of you signed," he said quietly. "And 1 of you wrote it." A long pause. "I did not sign this. I was not asked. I was not consulted. I was not told. And yet my pontificate's reform has been pushed back 3 months, quietly, while I was preaching to children in Cameroon." Another pause. He let the silence work. "That is the first document," he said. "There are 8 more." He pulled out the second page, then the third, then the fourth. Each one detailed a decision made during his 11 days in Africa, a reorganization of a small office, a reassignment of a financial supervisor, a renegotiation of a contract he had personally suspended 6 months earlier, a delay of an investigation he had personally ordered, a travel authorization for a bishop he had explicitly asked to remain in his diocese pending review. Each document bore signatures that, by Vatican procedure, should not have been sufficient. Each had been carried through anyway. As each new page appeared, the silence in the room grew heavier. By the 8th document, the oldest cardinal, nearly 80, was visibly trembling. By the 9th, another had begun to weep, his shoulders shaking quietly beneath the dim light. Leo XIV did not raise his voice. Not once. He did not slam the table. He did not insult. He did not threaten. He simply read. 11 days, he said finally, while I was in Africa. 11 days and 23 pages of damage. He set the folder down on the table. I know what each of you was doing. I know who initiated this. I know who agreed. I know who signed without reading. I know who passed the documents along. I know who stayed silent. And I know who told you to stay silent. His voice did not change. Calm, steady, cold as marble. I am not here for confessions. I am not here for excuses. And I am not here to humiliate any of you. A small breath. I am here for the truth. But what came next caught all of them off guard, because the Pope was not going to ask them anything yet. He was going to tell them something first. Leo XIV sat down. He folded his hands on the table. He spoke in Italian, slowly, clearly, so no one in the room could misunderstand. This church, he said, will not be governed in shadow. Not while I am here. Not after I am gone. Not in this pontificate. Not in any pontificate that follows. He looked at the eldest of them. You knew Francis. You worked beside him. You watched what he tried to do, and you watched how parts of this house slowed him down, year after year, until he was tired, until his body was tired, and his words were tired, and even his sentences were tired. A pause. I am not Francis. I will not be tired the same way. The silence in the room had become absolute. You think, he continued, that because I came late, I do not understand the architecture of this place. You think that because I am quiet, I do not see what is moving. You think that because I am calm, I will be patient with what should never be tolerated. He looked down at the folder. You are wrong, on every count. His next words were the ones that would later be repeated in whispers across every dicastery in Rome, the words that several of the men in that room would carry with them for the rest of their lives. This church will not hide any more, not behind silence, not behind procedure, not behind red robes. He raised his eyes. Truth is not negotiable. Reform is not optional. And obedience to the See of Peter is not seasonal. No one moved. For the first time in many of their careers, none of the 12 had a strategy. None had a counter-move. None had a script. For decades, he continued, men in rooms like this one have governed the church as if she belonged to them, as if her wounds were inconvenient, as if her victims were a public relations matter, as if her finances were a private inheritance, as if her people were an audience instead of the body of Christ. A pause. That governance ends, in this pontificate, with me, in this room, tonight. He let that sentence sit. He did not blink. What he did next surprised them even more. He opened the small black notebook and turned to a single page. On it was a list. 12 names, each written in his own hand. Beside each name, a single word. He did not read the words aloud. He turned the notebook around slowly, page facing outward, so that each cardinal could read his own line. Some of the words were warning, some were review, some were removal, and one, only one, was trust. The cardinal beside the word trust did not look relieved. He looked stunned, because he had assumed until that moment that he was among the worst. The men beside removal went pale. 2 of them lowered their heads. 1 closed his eyes. The men beside warning exhaled. But their relief was short, because none of them yet knew what warning would mean. Leo XIV closed the notebook. Each of you will be informed individually, in writing, by the end of the week. Some of you will keep your roles. Some will be reassigned. Some will be asked to retire. A pause. None of you will speak about this meeting. Tonight, tomorrow, or for the rest of this month. If a single line of what was said in this room appears in the press, you will all be reassigned at once. Without exception, without trial, without appeal. The same hour the article is published. His voice did not rise. I will not negotiate with leaks. He picked up the red folder and held it up briefly. This stays with me. But copies exist. They are safe. They will be released in their entirety if anything happens to it, or to me. He let that sentence sit. It was the first time in the entire meeting that anyone in the room felt a different kind of fear. Not because the Pope had threatened anything, but because they realized for the first time that he had been preparing for this confrontation for far longer than they had ever imagined. Some of them began to wonder, silently, behind their faces. For how long had he known? Days? A week? Had he known before he ever boarded the plane to Algeria? Had he flown to Africa already aware that they would move against him? Had he given them the rope, watched them tie it, and then walked back into the room to take it? The thought passed through several of them at once. None of them dared to ask. But the most stunning part of the night was still ahead. He stood. He walked the length of the table slowly, past each man. He did not touch anyone. He did not lean in. He simply walked. He stopped at the 3rd chair from the end. He placed his hand on the back of the chair but did not touch the cardinal sitting in it. You, he said. He did not say a name. The cardinal looked up. You wrote the memo of April 16th. You drafted the language. You carried it to the others. You explained why the delay was necessary. You convinced 2 of your brothers that this was the wise course. The cardinal did not answer. I am not asking you to deny it. I have the metadata. I have the drafting trail. I have the email exchanges. I have the witness. There is no exit from this conversation that does not pass through honesty. The cardinal lowered his head. I did, he said quietly. Why? A longer pause. Because we believe the reforms are moving too quickly. Because we believe you do not yet understand the institution. Because we believe, some of us believe, that the Church needs protection from change as much as it needs change. Leo XIV listened. He did not interrupt. When the cardinal finished, the Pope nodded once. Thank you, he said. That is the first honest answer I have heard tonight. Then he leaned slightly forward. You may even be right. The Church needs protection. Some change is reckless. I do not pretend to be infallible in administration. A pause. But the Church does not need protection from accountability. It does not need protection from light. It does not need protection from the people of God knowing how their gifts are spent or how their pain is handled. He straightened. You did not protect the Church. You protected yourselves. That is the difference. And I think in some part of your heart, you already know it. The cardinal did not respond. His face had already answered. Leo XIV returned to his chair. He sat down again. This is what is going to happen, he said. He listed it slowly, calmly, as if reading a logistics memo. The financial audit reform would be accelerated, not delayed. The lay auditors would arrive in Rome on the 2nd Monday of May. They would have unrestricted access to every department, every account, every contract, every sealed file. The accountability protocol would be formalized as a motu proprio within 3 weeks. No more delays, no more drafts. The text already existed. It was complete. It would be signed. The structural redistribution would be phased. but binding. The first 3 offices to be affected would be named publicly. The cardinals who currently held them would be informed before the announcement, but only by hours. He looked up. None of you will be in those 3 offices when the announcement is made. A long silence. 3 of the men in the room had just learned in a single sentence that their careers as they had built them were over. One closed his eyes. Another folded his hands tightly. The third stared at the table. Then the Pope said something none of them expected. And one of you, not all of you, one, will be appointed by me to lead the new office of internal compliance. The position has not yet been announced. I will name the person tomorrow morning. He let that sentence land. The 12 men slowly looked at each other. They had walked into the room as a coalition. They were going to walk out as 12 individuals, each unsure who among them had just been chosen to be lifted and who had been marked for removal. Each of them aware that whoever was chosen would by morning no longer belong to their group. It was the most surgical move many of them had ever seen a pope make. "This is not punishment," he continued. "This is not revenge. I am not interested in either." A pause. "I am interested in a church that does not fail another generation." He looked toward the eldest cardinal, the one who had begun to tremble at the 8th page. "I sat with prisoners in Bata. They sang in the rain. They asked me to pray for their freedom, for their sins, and for their families. They prayed the Our Father with me, and I have not been able to stop hearing it since." His voice dropped slightly. "Those men, in that prison, in that rain, they are the church, not this room, not these walls, not these robes." He did not raise his voice on the next sentence. He did not need to. "And I will not return to them with a church that has been hollowed out by men who were too comfortable to defend her." A long silence. "I have sat with women who lost children to violence. I have sat with priests who lost their faith because no one defended them when they told the truth. I have sat with young people who left the church because they felt that her leaders were liars." He looked at each of them again. "Every one of those people deserves better than what has been done in this room over the last 11 days. The eldest cardinal lowered his head. The Pope did not press further. He had said what needed to be said. He rose for the last time. He walked to the door. He turned, hand on the handle. He looked back. "You are dismissed. You will hear from me individually. Until then, you will continue your duties as if nothing has changed. You will smile in public. You will offer Mass. You will receive pilgrims. You will write your letters. You will sign your routine documents." A pause. "You will not phone each other. You will not write to each other. You will not meet." Another pause. "And you will pray." A brief silence. "Especially," he said, "you will pray." He opened the door. "Good night, brothers." And he walked out. The 12 cardinals remained in the room for almost 10 minutes after he left. None of them stood at first. Some stared at the closed door. Some at the table. The cardinal who had wept covered his face with both hands. The cardinal who had drafted the April 16th memo stared at the empty chair at the end of the table for a very long time. It was the eldest who finally rose. He walked slowly to the door, opened it, and stepped into the corridor without speaking. One by one, the others followed. They did not look at each other in the corridor. They did not wait for each other in the courtyard. They left the apostolic palace one at a time, into the cold Roman night, into separate cars, into separate apartments, into separate sleeplessness. By 1:42 a.m., the side hall was empty. The lights were turned off by a Swiss guard who had no idea what had just taken place inside. The room was locked, and the silence returned to the Vatican. But the silence was deceptive. Within 24 hours, 3 things happened. First, a motu proprio was prepared for signature, formalizing the new accountability protocol for bishops accused of covering up abuse. Unusual in its tone, direct, short, with almost no diplomatic softening. Veteran Vatican observers would later describe it as the most uncompromising disciplinary text issued in years. Second, the names of the lay auditors arriving in Rome the following week were quietly circulated to the heads of every Vatican financial office. Each office was asked to prepare a complete inventory of accounts within 7 days. Every transaction over a specific threshold from the previous 12 months was to be made available for review. No exceptions, no exemptions, no requests for more time. Third, the Office of Internal Compliance was announced. The cardinal appointed to lead it surprised most observers. Not known as a reformer, not known as a conservative. Known simply and quietly as honest. A man who in his entire career had never appeared on television, never courted journalists, never written a personal opinion in any Vatican publication. He was the cardinal who, the night before, had been written next to the word trust. In the days that followed, the Vatican appeared on the surface to function exactly as before. The Pope greeted pilgrims in St. Peter's Square. He met with diplomats. He held his Wednesday audience. He smiled at the world. In private, the consequences moved quickly. 4 of the 12 cardinals submitted requests for early retirement within 72 hours. None gave a reason in writing. 2 were quietly reassigned to dioceses far from Rome. The official communiqué described the moves as pastoral renewal. Inside the walls, no one believed it. 3 received written warnings, each carrying a specific list of behaviors they were no longer permitted to engage in. 2, including the cardinal who had drafted the April 16th memo, were placed on a 6-month review. They retained their titles but lost their authority to sign on behalf of their dicasteries. Inside the Curia, this was understood for what it was: a quiet death sentence on their careers, delivered without scandal. None of them spoke about what had happened that night. Not to the press, not to colleagues, not to friends. Some, perhaps, in confession, but that by definition would never reach the public. And yet somehow, within a week, almost everyone inside the Vatican walls knew that something had shifted. The corridors felt different. Conversations grew shorter. Documents began moving faster. People who had been comfortable for years began arriving early, leaving late, double-checking what they signed. A young priest walking through one of the offices late one afternoon would later say that the air in the building had simply changed, that it felt, for the first time in his memory, like the men who worked there were aware of being watched. A senior cardinal, asked by a junior priest what had changed, gave only one sentence: "He sees more than we thought." A second cardinal gave a different answer. He waited, and we did not understand what he was waiting for. A third, asked nothing at all, was overheard saying to no one in particular, apparently to himself, "We confused his silence with his absence." That was the mistake. Inside the Secretariat of State, a senior Monsignor told a younger colleague that he had spent the night before the meeting unable to sleep. Not because he had been summoned, but because he had heard rumors that something was being moved against the Pope, and he had said nothing to stop it. "I told myself it was not my problem," the Monsignor said. "Now I cannot stop thinking that silence is exactly what got us here." He was not the only one. Inside several offices, men who had not been called to that midnight room found themselves examining their own conduct from the previous month. Letters signed without reading, memos passed along without questioning, meetings attended where the wrong things were said and the right things were not. The meeting had been with 12 men, but its weight pressed on hundreds. The story of that night never officially leaked. No journalist published the names of the 12 cardinals. No transcript appeared. No photograph existed. The room itself returned to its ordinary use within a week, as if nothing had ever happened inside it. But several things changed in the Vatican that could not be explained by any public document. The pace of internal correspondence accelerated noticeably. Letters that once took 3 weeks began arriving within days. Approvals that once required 5 signatures began moving with 2. Files that had sat on desks for months began closing. Behind every one of those changes was the same understanding, never stated, but universally felt. The Pope was paying attention, and those who had once treated his attention as something they could maneuver around had learned, in a single night, that they could not. In the Holy Father's private apartment, a few days after the meeting, an aide brought him the morning briefing. The aide noticed something unusual on the desk: the small black leather notebook, the same one the Cardinals had seen that night, sitting open beside a fresh page. On that page, the Pope had written in his own hand a single sentence, a private note, perhaps for himself, perhaps for the days ahead. The aide did not read it carefully. He turned away, but he saw enough to remember the first words later: "The Church will not hide any more," and below it underlined twice a single phrase: "Begin again tomorrow."